Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome back to the undisclosed location, which is definitely not my kitchen. This New Year's video is going to be a little bit longer and a little bit different than the ones I've done in the past. So all timestamps will be down in the description if you want to skip to just the show or a specific part of this video. This year, I wanted to go with the idea that maybe you're a dad, maybe you're the fun uncle, the funkle, who wants to put on a 4th of July or New Year's show for your family, but you only got a budget of, say, $300. How do you do that to put on a great show with a spectacular finale that your family's going to remember and still have enough left over for potentially some shells and maybe novelties for the kids? That's what we have in front of us today. Now we're going to go through the prices first, then we're going to talk about the haggling, because of course you usually do some haggling when you're buying $300-ish worth of fireworks. We're going to talk about gluing, bracing, staking these down onto boards or bracing them with bricks. All the good stuff. Like I say, timestamps down below. Let's get into it. When it comes to prices, we're of course going to be talking about the fireworks that are in front of me. And the fireworks that you see at your local stand or store may be different, but you're more than likely going to find some that are of a similar price point and a similar quality. So of course you may have to shop around, you may have to do some research, but use this as a jumping off point, like a lot of my videos. So first off, big match, and we will talk about firing order and effects and all that stuff a little bit later. Big match originally cost $25. Walk on the Wild Side, $15. No Mercy, $15 a piece for $30 total. Rifle Range Ahead, $45 a piece for $90 total. May the 4th be with you, $35 a piece, 3 of them for $105 total. Golden King, $25. And Leo, which is hiding over here, was $5. Now, that was the original asking price. Going down the list, we have a couple where we can have some savings. Rifle Range Ahead, I was able to get $10 knocked off of that to $80. With the May the 4th Be With You that were originally $105, I had that knocked down to $90. The Golden King, I had that knocked down to $20, and the guy at the fireworks stand threw in Leo for free. So you can usually get those deals, and again, like I say, when you spend a little bit more money, you tend to get a little bit more deals. So the original total was $290. Which even that total, you would have enough to go and get some sparklers and bottle rockets and stuff like that, you know, some fun novelties. But after haggling, after a little bit of wheeling and dealing, you could get that down to about $250 to $260, which leaves you enough money, at least $25 for a 12 ball shell kit or a 6-shot canister shell kit, and $15 for novelties like sparklers, maybe a small fountain, stuff like that. I think that's a pretty good show. Now, of course, we're not talking about a couple different items that you may have to buy. You may have to buy some plywood if you don't have plywood on hand. You may have to buy some liquid nails, or in this case, Loctite PL 8 times stronger fast grab. And again, we'll talk about gluing and staking these down in a second. But there's some other stuff that I'm not talking about in the price because you may or may not have them, and it may or may not be critical for your show. This is only covering the price of the fireworks after all. Now on the topic of making sure that these cakes are secure, I mentioned that you could glue them down as I've done here, or I mentioned that you could brace them with something like a brick. Now, I went with the glue approach, and if you're doing a bigger show, that's usually a better way to go because you could set up different positions on different boards and then carry them out together and set them up in a certain way to make it ideal for lighting. If you just have a couple cakes, you could usually get away with bracing them with a couple bricks or cinder blocks. Again, you really want to be careful with that because if you don't brace it properly, it can tip over. And the problem with that, most cinder blocks and bricks are not ideally shaped for these smaller cakes, which are more likely to tip over. So if you have a cinder block, you may only be able to brace these cakes on one side, which then leaves it able to tip the other 2 directions. So consider that. When it comes to staking them down, that's like taking one of those wooden stakes and hammering it into the ground to support these cakes. That is another great way to do it. However, this time of year, when it's winter, you're not going to have that good luck hammering stakes into the ground when there's frost on the ground, or in the ground rather. And even during the 4th of July, if you have rocky soil, you may not be able to hammer those stakes in. What you want to do though, if you are going the stake route, hammer 2 stakes in either side of the cake or firework, and then wrap it with some tape a couple times. The tape that I recommend is U-Haul packing tape. I'll put a picture up. It's known in the fireworks industry as Dave's Magic Tape because Dave at Display Fireworks 1 here on YouTube popularized it, and it is by far the best firework tape. I've used it for probably over a decade at this point, and that's my go-to tape. Now for gluing cakes down, there's a couple different ways to do it, and I've never had a cake tip over with the method that I use. What I do is I rip the paper off of the bottom of the cake. Most cakes have really thin paper on the bottom that you could easily tear, that then either exposes a piece of plywood or cardboard, or sometimes just the base of the tubes with the clay in the bottom. And that actually allows you to do 2 things. That lets you make sure that all of the tubes are properly packed with clay and hopefully powder as well, because I actually got a bump bear one time where I did this method, taking the paper off the bottom, and one of the tubes did not have a lift charge or the clay plug, which means if that one was lit and the fuse was lit for the lift charge, or not the lift charge in this case, for the shell, it would have just blown up inside the cake. So part of this is an extra safety measure, and part of this allows you to make sure that you are gluing the cake securely onto the board. If you are just gluing it onto that paper can easily rip, like I mentioned, making that cake tip over. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I use Loctite PL Fast Grab 8 times stronger. This is just what I've been using. It has seemed to work phenomenally well with fireworks. The first few times I glued cakes down to plywood, I used liquid nails. Like I said, I've never had an issue doing this, but I like this stuff a little bit better than liquid nails for some reason. After I rip off the paper, I make sure to liberally apply this stuff to both the bottom of the cake as well as the board itself. And what I'll usually do is draw where that cake is going to be going, and sometimes a line where the fuse is going to be going, or oriented rather. That way I can put the glue onto the board as well as the cake. I'll usually smash it down, spin it a couple times, and then again remember where that fuse is meant to be orientated. Yeah, what the fuck ever, who cares? And again, I want to mention, when I was putting these cakes on the board, I was not being conservative with this stuff. I was being very liberal with my application. I was putting a lot of it both on the bottom of the cakes and on the board itself. And this is the only tube I went through. I put down all of these cakes with just this one tube, and I bet there's still about maybe an inch worth of stuff still left in here if I really needed to stake another one down. So that's not to say, you know, a dabble do ya sort of thing. I'm actually not saying a dabble do ya, but even being liberal with my application, one tube was all I needed for all of these fireworks. And after you glue down your cakes and squish them and spin them to make sure that all that glue is evenly spread and sticking well, let it set for about 24 hours and then just give it a little nudge test. Just nudge the firework. You don't have to hit it hard, but just give it a little push and see if it's gonna fall off or if that glue did its job. And in all these cases, looks like the glue did its job. You may also want to consider taking the tops off of your cakes before you start your show. That not only helps with cleanup so that you don't have a whole bunch of trash strewn about, but I've also found a couple cakes throughout my time as a pyro to have really thin pieces of plywood over the top instead of just like a piece of paper. And while the shell may be able to punch through that okay, it will no doubt lessen some of the height and could cause some issues. So better to just take the tops off. Next, I want to talk about placement. If you are bracing these fireworks or staking them down, you have to consider which ones you're lighting first. You have to consider where you want those to be so that you can light and then move to the next one and then move to the next one in a nice flow. You want to do the same thing with these boards, but you also want to set them up in a little different way. You want to set up usually a finale board as its own separate board, and then 1, 2, however many separate show filler boards as their own piece. That just makes it easier to carry around and easier to light, and again, kind of have that flow. You also want to make sure, this is hopefully obvious, but you want to make sure that the fuses of all these cakes are facing to the outside of the board. You don't want to have any fuses facing to the inside or over here to the edge or something, because when you're lighting it, this gets into the safety, which we'll cover a little bit of safety here in a minute. You want to light it away. You want to light it with your head away from the tubes and your arm extended. That way, if anything happens, if this goes off prematurely, you're not hovering over it and it doesn't shoot up into your face. If this explodes, you're far enough away that hopefully it disperses and doesn't hit you and do any damage. And the next part of placement gets into fusing. If you are fusing fireworks together, you have to put that into consideration with the placement. These two are being fired off together, so they're sitting right next to each other. So are these two. So are these 4. Now, when it comes to fusing, the absolute bare bones basic way to fuse fireworks together is just to tape the fuses together. Or you can kind of twist them together. You can use zip ties. I prefer tape because you're able to put a little, inch or however long channel essentially where that fire is going to be hitting that fuse. Whereas if you use zip ties, you're just hoping that that fuse and the fire from that fuse is, enough to light. So it's just a little bit of added assurance there. And if you went the twist method, twisting them together, you're just hoping that they stay together and that you're able to light them at the same time. So a little bit of tape makes it a lot easier to light 2 fireworks at the same time. And then when it comes to fusing, it really doesn't have to be that complicated. I want to have Golden King going off roughly at the same time as these 3 May the 4th be with you. So all I did is I got a little section of fast fuse, and I ran that over and connected all 3 of the May the 4th be with you to the end of the fast fuse. I ran that down, connected Golden King to the other end of the fast fuse. Then, just because I have it on hand, I added a little section of green visco just to give myself a little bit of extra time to light it and get away before the fast fuse lights all 4 of these. That's not very complicated in my opinion. You can get really fancy with these. You could fuse all of these cakes together into one sequence if you wanted to, or you can do something as simple as this, or just tying the fuses together. The world is your oyster. Now onto the topic of safety, and when you're playing with fire, or in this case fireworks, that's a pretty important topic. Number 1, I already mentioned, do not hover over cakes or mortar tubes or Roman candles or whatever, even fountains, when they're being lit. And even best practice, don't hover over them when you're setting up your show, when you're carrying these cakes. If you're able to carry these boards, do so away from your body. I'm not even going to do it for the video. Don't put your face over it. Sometimes you have to. Sometimes you have to when you're fusing or when you're doing different stuff with these fireworks. But again, best practice is to never hover over these tubes. Even putting your body parts, like I'm waving my hand over these tubes, it's not the best idea. You want to light these fireworks and get away. You do not want to light it and stand next to it and wait for it to go off, and then when it blows off 2 feet from you, wonder why you lost all your hearing. Light it, get away. You don't necessarily have to run, Forrest, run, but just don't linger. Keep your crowd back as far as possible. Sometimes it's not that easy because you're maybe in a neighborhood, but ideally keep them back 100, 150, possibly further, 200 feet away. Trust me, they're gonna see the show just fine. If anything, they're gonna see it better because they're gonna be able to see the whole show instead of just having to crane their neck up and just get a little view of it. For you dads or fun uncles out there putting on your fireworks show, If your family lives in a cul-de-sac area, maybe you set up the fireworks show in the center of the cul-de-sac, and then you have the crowd sit at the opening of the cul-de-sac at the street side. That's usually what, 150, 200 feet? Plenty of space, more than safe. If you're setting up something like a mortar rack with a whole bunch of exposed fuses, consider covering those fuses with a piece of tape or some tin foil. That way, if sparks come raining down from your cakes or other shells, they won't light those fuses. And also consider storing your fireworks away from your show and far away from your crowd. There's been tons of videos recently from families having block parties where an ember jumps, a spark falls into a cake, and next thing you know, you have fireworks going off right next to grandma. Put your fireworks inside your garage or inside your shop with the doors closed, and then take them out as you light them. If possible, if you set up your show like this and you're doing a large show, feel free to set them out at your shoot site, but again, keep your crowd back at that point. That way, if you have any incidents, any accidents, the fireworks are going off in a safe location, and again, not right next to your crowd or any people. And last but not least, keep sparklers away from young kids, and make sure that you parents out there, monitor your other kids with sparklers. Sparklers are incredibly dangerous. They burn ridiculously hot. Metal sparklers are the worst of the worst because you actually have a metal rod that's heating up red glowing hot, and that can do a lot of bad stuff. I'm not even going to describe them here in this video. Sparklers account for, if I remember correctly, the most amount of ER visits when it comes to fireworks. So please, parents out there, keep them away from young kids and supervise kids that you are going to give sparklers. Now with all that out of the way, let's start talking about the firing order for these guys. We're going to start off the show with Big Match, which is a pretty large 25-shot salute cake. I figure what better way to ring in the 25th year of the millennium than a 25-shot salute cake. I figure that's pretty fitting. Then we're going to move down to Leo by Miracle. That's just a little 7-shot all crackle cake. Fun to play around with, and like I say, got that for free when I went down to the reservation recently, so why not? After that, we're going to go over to No Mercy, both No Mercies. 8-shot cake with a 2-shot salute finale at the end. Should be a fun little combo. Then Walk on the Wild Side. All color cake, but it's a pretty nice color cake. I shot it off last New Year's and it was pretty nice. Then I have a debate. My initial plan was to shoot off Rifle Range Ahead with all 3 May the 4th Be With You and Golden King as the grand finale. But what I think I'm going to do instead is light this guy and have it going, and then after, shot 2 or 3, start this one. The finales aren't going to line up, the timing isn't going to line up necessarily, but the finale for May the 4th Be With You is pretty spectacular, just one cake by itself, and I think having all 3 with Golden King going at the same time is going to be way more than enough, and having this guy going a little bit before is going to allow a couple extra seconds a show, maybe 15 seconds extra a show, which if you could pad out your show, might as well. More fireworks, more time shooting fireworks is always more fun after all.
Starting off with Big Match. It's gonna be a good one. Woo! You can feel those in your chest, baby. on, baby, let's get to some shells. 2 1/4 inch coconut. I believe these are endgame shells. Oh, those are gorgeous. All right, let's see. No mercy. 2 of them at the same time. Oh, get back. Watch out. King shell. A stump. Master 100. Oh, cow. 2 1/4 inch shell. Yeah, those hit. Wow, another master. Those are hanging pretty good. No, the thumper. Oh, I love doing that. All right, walk on the wild side. A couple salutes for the road, why not?